we will hear about effective implementation of NbS in urban areas case studies in a few seconds, but I will wait for maybe 1 or 2 minutes to give the chance to all participants to leave the waiting room. So we will wait for a few more moments. Okay, hello to everyone. Hello, dear panelists. Hello, dear audience. Welcome to the session A8 of the Climate Academy 2021. Today, we will talk about effective implementation of nature-based solutions in urban areas, and we will hear about some case studies. The Climate Academy is a series of workshops and sessions, online sessions, jointly organized by the Munich Re Foundation and UNU EHS in Bonn in collaboration with the UNFCCC. My name is Christian Bartelt. I work for the Munich Re Foundation as project manager, and resilience building as well as climate change adaptation, including nature-based solutions, are one of the core pillars of our work. So we are very much interested in today's session. Today, we will hear first from 4 selected participants of our Climate Academy program, and they will talk about specific nature-based solutions case studies. We will talk about how they can be effectively implemented, and we will hear about hurdles, challenges, and opportunities to overcome those. The regions addressed will be, amongst others, Canada, Nepal, and Uganda. And after the 4 case studies, we will hear from a representative of ICLEI about their so-called Clever Cities project. So with that, we will leave the case study perspective a bit, zoom out, and look at a larger program organized by ICLEI, which tries to support the implementation of NbS on the ground in communities on a larger scale, which sets more or less the umbrella for the case studies which we heard about beforehand. So I would like to thank the panelists in advance for the rich inputs, or at least I guess that they will be rich. And before we get started, I would like to do some housekeeping and explain the program. As said, we will have 4+1 presentations, each roughly 10 minutes, followed by 2 minutes direct questions. And the rest of the time at the end of the session, maybe 20 minutes, we will use for general Q&A and open a panel discussion. To the audience, please feel free to also use the Q&A function, which you will find in your app, and ask questions when you have them. Our panelists will try to answer those in the course of the event, also in a written way if needed. And I really invite my fellow speakers here to have a look at the Q&A session as well. Before we get started with the case studies, I briefly would like also to introduce our panelists for today. So that's me, I already introduced myself. The first speaker will be Sushita Shrestha. She's a researcher working at the South Asia Institute of Advanced Studies, SIAS, a Nepal-based policy research institute. She has over 5 years of experience on engaged research and local policy mainstreaming. She has a keen interest in working on the knowledge action policy interface, and her presentation will be on the application of recharge ponds for water management in Nepal, I guess. Our second speaker will be Dr. Asmita Bardwai. She is an environmental planner, international development specialist, and public policy expert who has 17 years of experience working with universities, think tanks, intergovernmental bodies, and NGOs in a broad range of countries. She obtained a doctorate from Cornell University in the US, and currently she is pursuing a second graduate degree in public policy at the University of Regina in Canada. Her presentation will be on best management practices in water governance and climate adaptations in Saskatchewan in Canada. The third speaker today will be Dr. Siddharth Narayan from the East Carolina University. There he's an assistant professor in the Department of Coastal Studies, and he holds a master's in coastal engineering and management. Oh, sorry for that. He completed a PhD in coastal flooding modeling at the University of Southampton. And now he's working in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. His work focuses on modeling and measuring the physical and socioeconomic effectiveness of nature-based adaptation strategies to coastal hazards and sea level rise. Our fourth speaker today will be Lillian Daphine Luniolo. She is a climate fellow with the UNFCCC and UNU EHS climate program. And she's a junior professional passionate about climate change issues in the context of the water, energy, food climate nexus, which is very interesting as well. And the application of nature-based solutions on the ground is also in the focus of her interest. She has an academic background in water and environmental resource management. And right now, as I said, she is the fellow in the early career climate fellowship program between UNU and UNFCCC. She will talk about a case study from Kampala in Uganda. Our last speaker then will be Ingrid Kötzi from the ICLEI. She's the director for biodiversity, nature and health at ICLEI, which is the local government and NGO for the local governments for sustainability. She has more than 30 years experience in sustainability and governance and is happy to share that with us. Before joining ICLEI in 2016, she worked in national, subnational and city governments, so a lot of policy experience. Her work focuses on mainstreaming nature, its contributions to people and nature-based solutions into urban planning and decision-making in cities. And as said, she will present on the Clever Cities project of ICLEI. Having said this, I would like to end my screen sharing here and hand over to Sushita, who is our first speaker.
Thank you, Christian. So I'll share my screen first. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it, but still not in the presentation mode. Yes, now it works.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Suchita Srastha, and I work as a researcher in South Asia Institute of Advanced Studies in Nepal. So I'll be talking about implementation of nature-based solutions for urban water management in case of municipalities of Nepal. So I'll be talking about context and focusing on one case studies and the lesson learned. So you can see in these pictures, like there are lots of water cans lying, and people are desperately waiting for this water tanks that government is sending. And there are some women carrying water jars over their head. So this is how our cities in Nepal are facing, and people are facing the day-to-day hard work for collecting this water. So there are some factors that is affecting the water sector. That is rapid population growth, climate change, and the geographical condition and terrain of Himalayan region, and other socioeconomic factors such as water governance and adaptive capacity of our government. So focusing on urbanization, Nepal is one of the 10 least urbanized countries in the world. And the growth rate has been doubled since 1991 to 2001. And the urbanization is predominated by gray engineering. So in case of climate change, we stand at 4th vulnerable country. And there are lots of extreme weather events such as floods and droughts, and also because of climate change, the glacier is melting. And also our springs are drying and our groundwater are also drying. And if you see our city growing, it is mostly in the mid hills, and and 45% of our country is covered by mid hills. So how the urbanization is happening is I would say it is anti-nature urbanization, because all the green spaces involved in the city is rapidly converted into gray areas, and you can see there are lots of old age homes which has been covered for building the cities. And also there are trees that has been cut down for the road expansion, and this hills are converting into rapidly growing touristic destination. And also because these new municipalities are forming, so they are building these roads very haphazardly that is cutting the channels of the natural springs. So municipalities are facing lots of challenges throughout this urban water. For example, climate change and urbanization, and also the deterioration of infrastructure and old infrastructures, and also the public behavior that spends a lot of water being in the urban centers. So there are multiple factors that this municipality is facing throughout this urban water, and there are also multiple actors that demand water. For example, industries versus domestic uses, and there are multiple views like what to do with the water sources, and also there are multiple priorities according to the institution and also actors. So it is quite tough game to play. So this is the climate adaptive water management plan for cities in South Asia, which this is the project that I worked. And there are case studies of the Nikhil and Dharan municipalities. So I would focus my talk in implementation of NbS in the Nikhil municipality case. So talking about the general scenario, it is in the mid-hill, and there is a community managed drinking water supply system already, but it is not sufficient. And there are some recent initiatives by the Nikhil municipality, like negotiation with the upstream community for water, and they are also building large-scale water supply project, and they have also implemented this one house and one tap scheme. So talking about the history, there were lots of conflicts around this water. As you can see here, the picture about the public is deteriorating this public taps because they are not getting enough water. So what we did was identifying the problem. For identifying the problem, we implemented this multi-stakeholder approach, and we started with this city scale workshop in which all the stakeholders were invited, and we identified most prioritized water management issues over there, and also identified solutions to mitigate the water. And for this deliberation, we formed this forum called Water Forum, and locally it is named as Dhulikil Pani Chautari. And it is one of the systematic way of engaging diverse stakeholders, and where we can have the inputs of knowledge from various actors, including community and government and non-government organizations, and also this knowledge centers like universities, and also women groups and community-based organizations. So talking about Water Forum, we formalized this forum as a Pani Chautari, as I already said. And why? To promote the learning culture among the diverse stakeholders for water supply system, and to co-create the knowledge. We don't go there to just say what we know, but we facilitate there and take all the knowledge that various stakeholders might have. So there are also opportunities to collaborate among these local stakeholders. And it is not kind of rigid, but it is an open deliberative platform. So while prioritizing the main problems, in Dilik Hill, they said that the community said that the water drying springs are drying in their area. So we focused on the drying springs problem. And then identification of appropriate solutions. From the group discussions and all the participatory approach, we found that constructing recharge pond as most appropriate intervention to revive drying springs. And we gathered all the knowledge from diverse stakeholders. And for example, the traditional knowledge, engineering assessment and field observation and review of other documents and feasibility study and also visualization of the map through map. So then we started piloting the nature-based solution, and it is because we can showcase the tangible action to city stakeholders, and it also gives opportunity to assess what works and what not. And we build this network of contour trenches and recharge ponds, and there were And during piloting, we also measured the efficiency of how this is working throughout this research period. So, and this knowledge generated was strong base for convincing the municipality stakeholders mostly. So we also initiated this institutional collaboration. So we did a direct collaboration with the municipality because it was the major stakeholders to supply the water for the community, and also there was users committee, the Liquid Drinking Water Supply Sanitation User Committee, which is community-based organization. And we did consultation with other major government offices like Division Forest Office and others. And also there were other local institutions such as University, Kathmandu University for knowledge generation, and private sector for such as hotels and resorts for financing. And but it was we didn't took any finance from the private sector till now, but we just initiated the conversation, and also initiate the conversation of contribution of physical labor from Nepal Army. And then we then went to this financing and mainstreaming. So we from the project we have a seed fund, and then that encouraged the local municipality to allocate their own funds for the pond construction. And after some period, when the pilot was successful and they were convinced, we advocated for the mainstreaming that pilot for upscaling in the municipal policy. So in municipal policy and programs of fiscal year 2018 and 19, the municipality recognized the benefits of recharge pond. And also they adopted the program called Policy of Revitalizing Existing Ponds and Building New Ponds in each wards. They also allocated this 2 million Nepali rupees for the One Ward, One Pond program. And they also allocated their budget for conservation of various water resources such as springs, ponds, and stone spouts. And also they also acknowledged the forum that we created, a water forum, in their plan and policy book. In summary, what we did was in Water Forum 1, we did a discussion and prioritization and common understanding, building the common understanding among the various stakeholders. And then in Water Forum 2, then we discuss about the most critical issues, and then prioritize the main problem, and then look forward to solution. And then in Water Forum 3, we talked about how these water recharge ponds work and all the technicalities and all the field visits and all. And in Water Forum 3, the pilot of recharge pond was decided. And you can see the stakeholders, they are mayors and all private sector and representatives and all are talking about this. We came into a declaration from this forum, which was signed by Mayor, and that was done because that would be a kind of documentation for future to know about what was decided and what can be the future action. So I think I would skip this Dharan case, which was for the groundwater recharge. So after all this experimentation in implementation of the NbS in municipalities, we propose this implementation framework for nature-based solution, like assess and design and piloting what has been assessed, and then mainstreaming it into municipal policy for scaling up, and then monitoring and feedback would be a kind of everywhere. So it follows a cyclical and consultative process where both the local stakeholders and expert continuously learn for co-production of knowledge and co-design of context-specific nature-based solution. So the lesson learned was the nature-based solution would be a very site-specific. And because in Dharan, we had another kind of problem and another kind of solution, like groundwater was the main problem in Dharan municipality, and we proposed this recharge pit for that city. So so the nature-based solution would be a very site-specific, and building on what is already known and what are the major issues should be the main key. And we also it is kind of challenge also. This implementation of nature-based solution needs a long engagement with the stakeholders, and also there should be, it should not only be the knowledge should be coming from various stakeholders, and also it should be an interdisciplinary approach, like social science and ecological science. So all the knowledge is very important for finding out the solution. And we should also find synergies and complementaries across the institution and represented in the network. So so what we found is we should take opportunity to involve all the stakeholders as much as possible and find what that institution can give in for implementing the nature-based solutions. So engagement, evidence, and ownership are the three main factors that we need to have for implementing the nature-based solution on ground level. So another thing is definition of development perspective in the local level is very different because they all want to have a gray engineering structures, and so nature-based solutions are not a development for the municipality here in our context. So we need to shift the definition of development in the local level. So also the policy, what we found is that policy has the power of transformation. So if we are to upscale this pilot, then we need to advocate with the municipality for mainstreaming that it into the policy. And municipality, local government are very keen to collaborate if they feel. They are also in the need of evidence-based policy, because they are, in our context, the municipalities are very new. Only in 2017 they have started working. So they are in need of this kind of knowledge and this kind of suggestions from the experts, and this kind of engagement with them for improving their development agendas. So so they are very keen to collaborate in our context. So what we did later on is publish this toolkit, and also
Sushita, I'd kindly ask you to come to an end within the next minute or so, because we are a little bit over time so already.
Okay, so these are the publications that we developed after our implementation, which is very useful for other municipalities to, if they want to facilitate as a water, what we did in a water forum, and implement the nature-based solutions. Thank you so much for listening, and sorry for taking a long time.
Thank you very much, Sushita. If the two latest publications are publicly available, you can also post the link online in the chat if you like, because that might be of interest to many of our participants. I would have 2 or 3 questions directly to you, but I will put them to the end of the session in order to not lose too much time. What I found very inspiring is really the participatory approach here, and that you managed to somehow get a sustainable funding for the idea or the project by integrating it in local finance structures by local governments. And this is, in my eyes, one of the main important aspects when it comes to local projects, to really include it in local policy finance structures. Otherwise, a project will never be sustainable, because then it's always donor driven, and this can't be the end of the goal. So let's hand over to our second speaker. It's Dr. Asmita, and the floor is yours. I hope everything will work out. If not, we can help you or assist with any technical issues. Please turn on your camera and your microphone as well. Asmita, we still can't hear you. Your camera and microphone are muted.
Unmute. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
You're unmuted. We can hear you, but could you also turn on your camera if possible?
Start my video. Okay, so
okay,
can you see me now?
Yes, we can see you, but still we can't see the full screen of your presentation. But
okay, can you see this now?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, here, and then duplicate slide.
Now, can you see it?
No, unfortunately not yet. Now it works. Good.
Right. So thank you so much, everybody. And this is a very lovely platform. And I would like to share the findings of a project that I'm working on, funded by the Social Sciences and Humanity Research Council of Canada. And it's on best management practices in water governance and climate adaptation in Saskatchewan province, Canada, where I came 2 years back after 10 years of work in India, and then 10 years of work in the United States. So my project is about global climate change will increase risks and vulnerability in Saskatchewan, Canada, a province highly affected by floods and droughts, making adaptation a critical need. For those who don't know Saskatchewan, it's also the breadbasket of Canada, largely known as a prairie province. Best management practices have been used till now to improve water quality and control water pollution, and have been defined by the Clean Water Act of 1972. Despite the fact that the BMPs have been around for more than 50 years, Canada's water quality is at risk. This is because this project hypothesizes that these are constrained by technocratic ideas and fail to recognize the governance aspects of these best management practices. Water and climate change problems are not solved by technical measures alone, but are largely problems of governance. And when we don't realize their governance aspects, this affects their implementation and affects water quality. And in this project, we are combining 2 theories, one of adaptive governance and the second of the nature-based solutions, to understand these best management practices, which have been emerging in this province for a couple of past years, which has resulted in solutions which, like, we are trying to conflate 2 theories here, best management practices and nature-based solutions, which are exemplified by practices developed through partnerships between governments, watershed management associations, and communities, such as drainage ditches, source water protection plans, constructed wetlands, etc., which are now coming up as solutions to the water governance and climate change challenges that municipalities here are facing in this province. Through this project, we have looked at 14 municipalities, and we are also trying to understand them through the theoretical presence of adaptive governance frameworks and nature-based solutions. So I'll just present this work to you briefly. Saskatchewan is an interior province located in Canada. You can see on the map, and we have around 14 watersheds and 7,000 municipalities. So with the help of the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds and the Water Security Agency and the professor that I work under, we have chosen these municipalities. So the theory of adaptive governance is largely taken from Halbert and Gupta, and it's comprising of so we've taken this adaptive capacity wheel, which looks at 6 indicators, and to understand how these practices may enhance the adaptive capacity of communities, and how robust are these adaptive institutions that have emerged. And the nature-based solutions we've taken from the IPBES, and these have 14 indicators, which we have applied to each and every municipality. So this is still work in progress, but I will report to you how far we have gone with it. And we plan to come up with policy recommendations largely at the regional level, the provincial level. So for instance, there are 14 indicators like habitat creation and maintenance, regulation of climate, regulation of water quantity, etc., which are tied to these best management practices, which are also nature-based solutions. So case study 1 is the village of Avonlea, which is a constructed wetland. And this is a very interesting constructed wetland in a village of around 300 population, which was facing a wastewater treatment problem since 1970s. So the watershed association here, called the Moose Jaw River Watershed Association, teamed up with the village of Avonlea and several provincial and federal bodies to come up with this constructed wetland vis-a-vis a single cell lagoon, where the community was involved in planting using cattails and bulrushes, which are plants which clean up wastewater, and local school children were participating in the same for creating this constructed wetland, which was created through a variety of through the partnership of a variety of actors involved in the implementation of this BMP. And in terms of nature-based solutions, this constructed wetland is not just cleaning up the wastewater, but it's also increasing biodiversity and regulating climate with carbon sequestration, and where community is also learning a number of things based on the IPBES framework. The second case study is also a very interesting one, because this is something very, very unique to Canada. These are First Nation communities, which are the indigenous communities of Canada. And they have a system that is different from the federal and the provincial system. So they have their own self-governance system. I will not describe it. It's a very, very complicated system. So this community, Mitswasis, is a First Nations community, which was able to leverage partnerships with organizations, which is a local river basin council, the University of Saskatchewan, and several consulting organizations to create and implement something called a source water protection plan and flood management and climate protection through these partnerships. So the source water protection plan allows us to protect habitats, better water quality, and also there is a largely spiritual value attached to these source water protection plan. And also there is regulation of climate. So this is something very, very unique, that a very, very sophisticated system that was created by the First Nations community of Mitswasis. So these are around 14 studies, and I'll briefly glimpse through it. We have a project website also that we can share. The third one is about a northeast whale in Saskatoon, a pretty large city in Saskatchewan, which the nature-based practice or the best management practices over here is a complex legislative and institutional framework created by multiple actors like the Miwasan Valley Authority, City Authority, with the involvement of a civic society group called Swale Watchers, which led to the development of several plans and guidelines, including Miwasan Northeast Whale Master Plan, etc., to protect this ecological feature, which has both water and climate ramifications. So this is more in detail, what are the different guidelines that have been developed, and this whale was being threatened by a highway and by the upcoming neighborhoods, largely urbanization. So these are the number of legislative frameworks, institutional frameworks developed to protect this whale. And these are forming a part of the nature-based solution, because the whale is home to more than 200 plant species and a large number of bird species. And it has it is safeguarded because of the freshwater quality and quantity regulatory services it offers, and also filtering of urban pollutants. Then the next case study is about Kawases, which is also a First Nation community which has its own self-governance system. And in this case, what is also happening in this province is that there are abandoned wells which are leading to water contamination of the aquifer, and the Water Security Agency is getting together with the with the communities, with the Kawasis First Nations, and raising funds and along with the Water Security Agency and working with the communities, they are decommissioning the abandoned wells so that like water can be protected from contamination. So these are the various bodies that are involved in decommissioning of these abandoned wells. Then the fifth case study is about Okabini CND, which is also a very different governance arrangement, which is like this is something peculiar to Saskatchewan and probably many other provinces in Canada. It's a conservation and development district which has been formed when certain producers got together to address this problem of drainage, like farmers were draining from their land, and that water was going into the nearby river and affecting the water quality. So they created this conservation and development area. And also then they collaborated with our other agencies to create a big, like a drainage ditch where all the water could now like collect and flow. And this was to protect the water quality of the nearby river. So this is a pretty big practice that is being followed in Saskatchewan. So this is like the CND is a very landmark kind of governance system, and also a nature-based solution where agriculture and stormwater runoff by way of controlling sedimentation and erosion was created, which had multiple benefits, multiple benefits like not only reduction of nutrient loading, but also protection of soils and regulating freshwater quality and quantity and protection of soil fertility. Another case study was another municipality called RM Stothouse, where both abandoned wells were decommissioned by the watershed organization called Lower Sewers Watershed Committee and Water Security Agency, along with landowners, thus creating like adaptive institutions. And here again, the farmers were flooding fields for better agro-productivity, and they resorted to agricultural drainage. So there was both regulation of freshwater quantity and quality. Then another study, this was Weyburn, which was a water treatment plant where the provincial government, the city of Weyburn, a utility board, and the Rural Pipeline Association got together to create this water treatment plant, which was which supplied water to both the rural and the urban municipalities which come under the Weyburn. And this is also this does not involve too much community. Okay, like we'll go very quickly. So there were a couple of other cities like I think the most interesting one I will say is Melfort, like because there a pipeline ruptured and released crude oil into the river, and the city of Melfort and the Sask Water, which is a provincial authority, got together along with residents to use an alternative reservoir to provide good water. And so these are like solutions which are combining adaptive governance along with nature-based solutions to address water and climate problems in communities of Saskatchewan. So that's where I'll end. And this is our team. We have a very international team. So that's about it, what I would like to today talk to.
Thank you very much, Asmita. That was a lot of information condensed in 10 minutes. That was really great. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we got quite a clear picture what you're doing with the first few case studies you presented. Just a question, because you now managed to finish in time. The case studies you presented so far mainly are placed in rural areas, as far as I understood it. How does it interlink with urbanization processes, or how can we see the link there? Because in the beginning we said it's about NbS in urban areas as well, but then when we had to look at the case studies now, the core regions were really in rural areas more or less. How is the interlinkage here?
Okay, so actually they're not all rural. Like many of them are urban municipalities. Mm-hmm. So they are both urban and rural municipalities, not entirely just rural. Like rural, maybe I should have not shown you the case study of the rural ones.
No, it was okay. It was very interesting because they're interlinked.
Right. Anyway. Because urban, like the 14 municipalities are not entirely rural. Mm-hmm. It's only like maybe Stothoaks or some other ones that are rural. Kawasis is not rural. First, Mitswasis is not rural. Melfort is urban. So there are like a lot of urban municipalities as well. Mm-hmm. So actually, this is a larger project. So probably I should have just given you the urban ones. But urban and rural are very, very interlinked because these are like interlinked governance systems. And I mean, like for me, Canada is a new country, but it's very different from the way urbanization is there in, say, a country like India. So I think it's important to, like, we cannot, there is not that much stark distinction, according to me, here in between rural and urban, as I would say in a city like Delhi or like, any of the Asian cities or any of the developing countries. So that's why we've kind of also included the rural ones, but like probably maybe the urban ones are more important for you. So
no, it was really interesting to see. And I would assume that in Canada, for example, because you have so much space, that the borders are really fluent, what is rural and what is urban, whilst in other regions, for example, in Germany, you have this very dense cities, and then the rather not so densely populated rural areas. So there's a clear distinction. But with Canada, maybe the borders are a little bit more fluent. So thank you very much for this.
Yeah, it is. It is actually, Canada is a very, very exciting, like a very different, like in this province, the rural and urban is very like, it's a growing urbanization, but they want to preserve their rural character as well. So this is a very unique province.
Okay, so thank you very much for this insight. And now I would like to hand over to Sid, Dr. Siddharth Narayan from the East Carolina University, and I hope everything with the techniques will work. If not, we are happy to assist. That looks good. You just have to unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Sorry, forgot about the unmuting. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. And...
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Sid, I'm Siddharth. I'm originally from India. Right now, I'm an assistant professor at East Carolina University in the USA in North Carolina. So that's on the Atlantic coast. And so that's where I want to bring all of you to, is to the coast. Most of my work has been focused on coastal areas. And today I want to talk about when do nature-based solutions work as coastal defenses and when do they not work as coastal defenses? And just briefly, hold on a second. So my background briefly is in coastal engineering. So I just made a word cloud out of this. So basically the words that you see here are work that I do. So I'm a civil and coastal engineer. I work on nature-based solutions. I use engineering modeling tools to understand how these nature-based solutions can reduce hazards like storms and help protect people. So by protecting nature, we're helping to protect people. And I was inspired by the first few talks in the Climate Academy by Zita and Simone and Coco Warner about, what is our ambition and what is the mission statement. And so I was thinking about this throughout, and I've sort of come up with one here. Would love to discuss it with everyone else as well. Is 20% of global urban coastlines with nature-based solutions to reduce risks. And I say this sort of based on some studies that have been coming out showing, first of all, that greening is increasing across the world, with China and India leading this actually. But a lot of this is actually just cropland, an increase in cropland area. On the other hand, there's also a lot of potential for ecosystem coverage in urban cities, mangroves, marshes, seagrasses, coral reefs, in urban coastal cities that can help reduce these risks. And so by understanding where these ecosystems can work to protect people, and by understanding how we can increase that cover, maybe we can get to this ambition at some point. And so the other thing that Coco mentioned in one of her talks is, how do you get from ambition to implementation? And that is where, as an engineer, I focus on in my work, and I'd like to focus on that today. And I'd like to do this using 3 case studies across India, the US, and the Pacific Islands. India and the US, I want to focus on the engineering modeling work that you see in this red box here. Basically, what happens when you have mangroves versus don't have mangroves for your flooding. And in the Pacific Islands, I want to go look at the people behind these mangroves and try and understand, okay, what are their priorities when they are faced with coastal hazards, and how do these nature-based solutions fit into that? And so I want to start with something I did when I was doing my master's a while ago. I did that on a case study in India looking at mangrove defenses for an Indian port. And so this is basically on the top left here, you'll see Sundarbans, instantly recognizable as the largest mangrove deltaic area in the world. But my case study was focused on a very, very tiny sister of the Sundarbans located on the eastern coast of Orissa in India. And that's zoomed in over here. And you can see this tiny island just to the north called Kanika Sands. And just behind that island was a massive port coming up, a deep water port coming up. And so as this port was coming up, I was thinking, there's an island here with a lot of mangrove coming. What is that island doing when we have cyclones that come through this region? Is it helping to reduce waves at the port? And so it's basically what I studied. I looked at the mangrove structure. What do these mangroves look like in reality? How do I then put them into my engineering model? Here, I have waves that come from the ocean going towards the port. And then how does that translate to a reduction in that wave height? So essentially for a port, what we want is lower wave heights. And having this nature-based solution, which we didn't even create, it was already there. And the best that we can do is actually help preserve it in that state. And so we find that actually the island with the mangroves as it is dramatically reduces wave heights to the port. And this changes if that island were to lose the mangroves. So for example, if all the mangroves on that island were lost, you would get almost the same wave heights as your cyclone pushes through at the port. And also the mangroves are helping to keep the island itself together. And so there's a lot of benefits that the mangroves are already providing to this massive industrial complex. My next case study is moving from India to the US. And this is recent work that I'm doing right now with colleagues, both in academia, but also an NGO, the Nature Conservancy, and also very interestingly working with the insurance industry. So this is work that we're doing working with RMS, Risk Modeling Solutions, who are a very big insurance modeling firm, and using their hazard models to understand how including the effect of your wetland and mangrove extent will actually reduce property losses to the buildings behind during storms. And so this is basically what we're looking at right now. We're writing these results up is Hurricane Irma, which occurred in 2017. It devastated a lot of the Caribbean before it came to the US and made landfall twice in Florida. And what we're asking here is Florida in the south here has a lot of mangrove extent, including the Everglades National Park. And so the question here is, how did these mangroves reduce property damages from Hurricane Irma's storm surge? So we estimate that Hurricane Irma caused huge damages, both in storm surge and in rain and in wind. Here we're specifically looking at storm surge. And we find essentially here that the values in red are the areas, red and orange are the areas where mangroves actually stop the storm surge, just like they stopped the waves in India and reduced losses to properties from that storm surge. And so you find that a lot of these areas see over 10 to 50% reductions in their damages from Hurricane Irma because of these mangroves, meaning this is what I think Toby was talking about as avoided damages. And so if you didn't have these mangroves in place, if all these mangroves were gone, your damages would have been much higher. So just by being there, they're avoiding those damages. Just that island was there next to the port in India, it was avoiding those high waves. But you also see here, importantly, that mangroves don't protect properties everywhere. There are places here in blue on the West Coast and on the East Coast where, because these properties in Florida were built by digging out mangroves and building in front of them, sometimes you have these areas where you have properties that are built in seaward of the mangrove. And so essentially what's happening is these actually see an increase in their flooding because of the mangroves behind them, because essentially mangroves are acting like a sponge. They're like slowing down the water piles up in front, and whatever is in front sees higher flooding. But this is a very important point for us to note that, first of all, mangroves work really well. Second, you don't want to be building in front of them, just like you don't want to be building in front of a seawall or a levee. So it's very careful to figure out, okay, if I have these coastal wetlands here, where should I build in order to actually maximize the benefit from them? And third is, we should probably not be destroying these wetlands and building there because these areas are inherently risky in the first place, and we're removing these defenses to people who live behind them. And that is sort of a very quick impression of the engineering modeling that I do to figure out when and where, how do these nature-based solutions work and when do they not. And I want to move over now to what matters to the coastal communities that actually live behind these ecosystems and actually face these coastal hazards. And this was a case study that we did looking at how coastal communities adapt to hazards and how do nature-based solutions fit into these hazards across multiple countries in the Pacific. And so this was from islands in the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and the Solomon Islands. And what we looked at was, essentially what we did was we asked all of these communities, what are the coastal hazards that you face? What is important to you? And we find that when you move from your neat engineering models of storm surge flooding and mangroves and actually go down to the community scale, just as we've been hearing in all the talks, especially with Suchita and Asmita's talk just now, is things get complicated at the local scale. So for example, just in terms of coastal hazards, the communities here see coastal erosion, but they also, there's logging upstream, so they see sediment build up on the reefs, which then get destroyed. They see wave impacts, they see high tide flooding, they see low-lying atoll islands are seeing permanent inundation due to sea level rise. And because of all of this, they're losing their homes, they're losing cultural assets, they're losing cash crops on the coast, they're also losing mangroves that they are using for other purposes, for example, for firewood or for extracting the honey or the fruit. And we see that there's a very complex situation here. And within this situation, you have to be, the communities are adapting to multiple hazards at the same time and in multiple ways. And so nature-based solutions do actually fit into these. We find that actually most communities, when you ask about what they prefer building structures, simply because they have seen structures that have been built several years ago even and are still standing and do their job. These were well-built structures. Ecosystem-based adaptation is a close second because these communities rely on and use their ecosystems a lot and therefore understand the value of preserving them. And in terms of implementation, it gets flipped. You see that ecosystem-based adaptation responses are actually more frequent than structures. And that's interesting. And we wanted to figure out why, so we dug a little deeper and we found that most of these communities, though they prefer having seawalls, they simply don't have the capacity to build those seawalls to the degree and extent of engineering they need. So often rock revetment is put in, but they don't have the capacity to do it properly and they see that it fails. On the other hand, they have lived and managed with their ecosystems for a long while and know how these ecosystems function. They know how to manage them in order to keep them healthy and allow their recovery after a storm. And so because of all that, ecosystem-based adaptation is actually more frequent as a response. And so understanding, tying all of these together, ecosystems help reduce risks. We can show using engineering modeling, even catastrophe modeling from insurance industry, for example, where exactly they reduce the risk and by how much. And then next step, the more challenging step is to bring it down to the local scale, understand what community priorities are, understand where these nature-based solutions may fit in and how they may address maybe a few hazards out of multiple hazards that communities face. And with that, I just want to bring back the ambition of addressing all of these problems to get to a 20% of global urban coastlines with nature-based solutions. And stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid, very much. That was really, really inspiring. And I would especially thank you for having first the pure math, so the numbers behind it, and then the social dimension in the second part. That was really inspiring. I have a question concerning the first part. I find it very interesting and very important to really give an economic value to the use of the ecosystems, because otherwise many stakeholders will not just take it seriously, like the private sector, for example. And what you are doing here is more or less the prerequisite before one could, for example, think about insurance solutions, which we had in the previous session. Do you feel already an interest of the private sector and the insurance industry, for example, or is it still more driven by NGOs and local governments, or is there already an existing interest of insurance providers?
Thank you. I think that there is definitely an interest. So I think it is still primarily driven by, not just by NGOs, but also in many cases by communities where bottom up, they're trying to say, we want to keep these ecosystems. But in terms of financing these solutions, I think there is increasing interest from the insurance industry. The challenge I feel is figuring out exactly how do you start, how do you get to that practical point where if someone says, oh, I am restoring 50 meters of mangrove in front of me, for you to say, okay, that is going to influence your insurance premium by X, or it doesn't. And I think getting to that point just requires more on the ground restoration projects and then measuring those and monitoring those. So I feel like we need a buildup of local evidence in order to get to that point. There is interest in getting there, but I think that we have a few steps to get there.
Okay.
And yeah, I just want to quickly mention one effort in that regard is TNC along with us, a team of us and AXA, I think, are working, funded by AXA, are working to develop a methodology for coastal resilience credits, similar to carbon credits. And hopefully that generates a market.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. So we now have Ingrid with us as well. But before we turn over to Ingrid, welcome, a warm welcome to you. We have one further presentation from the selected Climate Academy participants, and that would be Lillian from the UNFCCC. And so before we hand over to Ingrid, I would like to hand over to Lillian and ask her to take over the floor. So we already see the presentation. And Lillian, I think you have to unmute yourself and put on your camera, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
And one further note, we don't see the presentation mode, we see the next slide mode. So if you could just go to display settings, for example, and duplicate slideshow, but then you will not see your notes. I don't know if you work with notes.
Yeah.
That works. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much and welcome to my presentation. I hope you can see and hear me clearly. And I will be presenting to you a case, a potential case for application of nature-based solutions in Kampala. And here I'll compare a success and a failure, and then bring in the aspect of what could be exploited for this to happen. And I begin with the bad news because usually they say a bad beginning makes a good ending. So bear with me as we go through the bad news first. And you can see my next slide, please confirm. Okay, so I start with a BBC article of 2012 that listed the 10 monster traffic jams from around the world. And as you can see on your left-hand side, there were about 10 countries listed, and Kampala came 6th of those countries. And then there was a quote in that article that said, "We experience traffic jams every morning and evening, and especially when it rains. This is due to the very bad road conditions, coupled with poor drainage systems. The whole place is usually thrown into a mess, even though the stretches of the jams are not that long. Motorists spend hours trying to maneuver through these terrible roads." And that was a quote from one of the residents in Kampala, Bob Sembatia. And I wonder what is coming to your minds when you see that. But let's go to the next slide and we'll see more. So with a country that faces, not a country, a city that faces that kind of traffic jam, the government thought it very good to solve the problem, or at least alleviate the problem, by creating the Kampala Northern Bypass, which is a 21-kilometer stretch. And it's funded by the government of Uganda and the European Union through a loan from the European Investment Bank. The lane was, the stretch was originally 2 lanes, and it was supposed to connect to the suburbs of Kampala that are notorious for bringing the traffic into the city. And of course, the road, I must admit already that the road has enhanced the development of these suburbs, although it goes through a wetland, and a wetland that we will see on the next slide, it has a very critical importance when it comes to wastewater treatment. And as the next point goes, is a wastewater treatment plant that is supposed to be using this wetland, or that is using the wetland, but we will see the threat that this road and the developments around have caused. And you may also ask yourself, so after this happened, has the traffic jam reduced? Unfortunately not, but we hope for the best. Sorry. Okay, so this is the wetland that I am talking about. It's called the Lubiji wetland, and it's a very important water catchment area. It serves the city and the surrounding areas of Wakiso district. For your information, Wakiso and Kampala districts are the most urbanized districts in Uganda. And so this plant does a good job serving the people, the urban residents in those districts. And all the rainwater drains from the northern and the western suburbs, because this part is in the southern part of the city. And also the underground aquifers and the surface runoff is supposed to come into this swamp. And this wetland plays a very unique role in maintaining the biodiversity, especially the bird species, which also include our national bird, which is the crested crane. And of course, the predominant flora, as most tropical wetlands are, is papyrus. And for those of you who are familiar with ecology, you would know the advantages of having papyrus in wastewater treatment, but I will not go into the science of that. And so down you see that there's a wastewater treatment plant. It's both a fecal sludge and a wastewater treatment plant, for those of you who are familiar with those words. But for those of you who are not, in developing countries, you can either have a waterborne toilet, a flush toilet in other words, or you can have a pit latrine, which does not involve any water, but the fecal matter is kept in one place. And then when the place is full, it gets emptied and the fecal matter is transported to a fecal sludge treatment plant. So this plant is both a wastewater treatment plant and a fecal sludge treatment plant. And after all the processes have happened for filtration and everything, sorry, not filtration, for wastewater treatment, the water is supposed to be released into this wetland for further filtration, natural filtration. But what has happened to the wetland? You see that these are called taxis or matatus, those of you who are familiar with Swahili. And these are the small vans or buses that we use for transport back home. And these people here are using part of the wetland to draw water and wash these cars. It's a very common business back in Kampala, and it fetches a lot of income for people, especially the low income earners. And then on the other side, because of the development that has gone on, people are now encroaching on the wetland and they're dumping rubbish here. As you can see, the other side is papyrus and then the yams, and you can see that this is a dumping pit. What does that mean? It means that the water catchment area that we talked about previously is compromised. And likewise, the water doesn't find its way once it's draining from the upper parts of the city. And then also the wildlife, because previously, if there was papyrus all over, it would be easy for birds to thrive. But birds, apart from the marabou storks, cannot thrive in this kind of environment where there's litter and all the rubbish around. Also, it means that the papyrus is gone. So the ecological functions of the wetland are also going away. And then we cannot have efficient purification of the water, natural purification of the water, because of that destruction to the wetland. And when it rains, this is what happens. The photo on your right is a house that has been submerged after rains. And here, this is part of the wetland that has been drained for different activities. And you can see that when it rains, the green parts don't show a lot of water, but the parts where there's soil and no green grass or no green vegetation show a lot of water. And then when you remember that northern bypass that I talked about earlier, if you can see that the parts of the wetland that are green don't have a lot of water going through them. But when you see the parts that are full of soil, you can see, for instance, the road here is being flooded when it rains a lot in Kampala. And then in 2018, there was a headline. This is just one thing that I picked out of the so many things that have happened, that said that the Uganda National Road Authority, which is also called JUNRA, closed part of the northern bypass over flooding. And there was a good quote that was coming in, and it said, in a flood alert issued on that date, the authority said that the road in the neighborhood of Lubigi Swamp has become dangerous and impassable following a series of torrential downpours in Kampala. It's now blocked by the flooded vegetation from the swamp. Clearly, after destroying the papyrus and the downpour is heavy, then what do you expect? All that could be accommodated by the wetland ends up on the road, and the road is blocked, and that causes even more traffic jam, so more harm than good. Now, on the other side, on your right-hand side, you can see that there's part of a wetland that's still intact. And one wonders, is there a hope? Maybe, maybe not. So there's one interesting thing about this road development. After the road was opened up for people to use, a lot of people came up and they started dealing in ornamental trade. That's, in simple terms, trade of flowers, because as you all know, the wetland usually has water all year round, and it's easy to draw some of the water and use it for watering plants. So people thought it very wise to come by the roadside next to the wetland and then develop or grow potted flowers, which they can sell to people who are going back to their homes after a very long day from work. That is not only relaxing as you look at the flowers. The photos are too many, so they don't give you a very good feel. But if you can just look at the red in it, the colors, it's a very relaxing moment when you're driving from work to home, especially when you're using this highway. And we will see next on the next slide if there is actually a potential in utilizing this, because these people would have a potential to guard the wetland jealously if they were in charge by some sort of structures. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And the question that still lingers in my mind is, what if the people dealing in ornamental trade, the people selling flowers by the roadside next to this wetland, were empowered through trainings and bylaws by local government structures to be custodians of the wetland? What would happen? What if entities like Uganda National Road Authority could be deliberate in partnering with people dealing in the ornamental trade business in maintaining and reserving through planting and trading in trees or flowers? What would happen? And I just want to pose to us a question. Do you think that the people that deal in these businesses would work hard to get the wetland against reclamation and exploitation? Maybe because of the water, the soil, and the nutrients they get from the wetland, or maybe because they're aware that there's an aesthetic value in the businesses that they have. It's just food for thought, and I don't have the answers, but I really think there's a potential here. And now, on the other side, we come to the good news. So I forgot to say that the Northern Bypass was initiated 17 years ago, and unfortunately, it hasn't been completed. But that's not everything. On the other side, there's a road that was initiated a few years ago, and then it has been completed. Uganda seems to have learned its lesson in not caring about environmental and social standards, and it was manifested in a new road that was built as a Kampala Express Highway. Kampala Express Highway is a road that connects to our airport. For those of you who've been to Uganda, or for those of you who have not been there, Entebbe is a place where we have the biggest or the national airport. And the government decided to build a road from Kampala to Entebbe for obvious reasons of traffic jam, alleviating the traffic jam. And here they did a very good job. As you can see, the slide reads, Uganda's future is born with a green expressway. And for this, unlike the northern bypass, the road does not go through the wetland. It goes over the wetland. So it's suspended over the wetland. It traverses 5 swamps and has 4 interchanges. That means that a lot of people can connect through this road, especially those heading to the airport or those who are going to other places close by the airport. And it crosses 14 seasonal swamps stretching 6 kilometers. It has a toll plazas, a foot toll bridge, various infrastructure that it's supporting, but at the same time, it's not harming the ecological functions of the wetlands around that. And it's promising to become a blueprint of how concrete infrastructure can be can coexist with the natural environment. I must, however, mention that this was a very expensive venture for the government of Uganda that received support from China. And maybe that's one of the things that we can hinge on for the debate at the end of this presentation. And it's a 36.94 kilometer road that, like I said, stretches from Kampala to Entebbe, and then it also joins the Northern Bypass. And like I said earlier, the Uganda National Road Authority has taken big lessons from the failures on the Northern Bypass, and it's now putting in place environmental and social safeguards. As you can see in this photo, there's a clear drainage. There are trees alongside the road, and then further ahead is a wetland, which you will clearly see that there's no encroachment on that. And then people are very happy with it. Myself, I'm very impressed by this infrastructure. And I'm just thinking, what does all of this mean? For me, it's an invitation to research, maybe to compare the feasibility of exploiting ornamental trade for wetland restoration in the case of the Northern Bypass, and also maybe to map out the extent of damage and define potential for restoration. It could also be an opportunity for social campaigns to start, to engage the Uganda National Road Authority and the government of Uganda to do things even better. And for that, thank you very much, and over to you for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lillian, for this very insightful presentation, and also for giving us some hope in the end, because the first example was really a clear example on how it should not go. But it also provided some insights on how many stakeholders you would need to reach before you start such a big infrastructure project. And all of them, including the donors, must be aware of, for example, nature-based solutions before they start such a project. And this shows how difficult it is, I think, to really implement nature-based solutions in overall community urban planning. What could help, for example, are NGOs like ICLEI, who have contact and networks with over 2,000 communities, as far as I know, all over the world. And so their word has really something to mean when they talk to mayors, for example. And this is why it's now my pleasure to invite Ingrid Kötzi to our panel and to show some insights about the Clever Cities project. And I hope this works out. This looks good. We see not the full screen, but the regular PowerPoint mode. Looks good. And please unmute yourself, and then the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more than just Clever Cities. In fact, I'm going to talk about all the work that we do in our nature-based program. Let me just see if I can get my screen to move on. So we have a pathway which is called nature-based development. And what we try and do there is to focus on providing services to cities, as well as projects that look at how to protect and enhance nature, biodiversity, and ecosystems in the cities, because these things are the sort of underpinnings of our local economies, of the quality of life, and also they determine how cities should be built and the resilience of our communities. So one of the things that I just want to talk to very carefully today is, what do we find in cities? And I think the important thing here is that, you know, when we look at a city and we look at the nature in cities, it's important to understand that there are various services that we find in nature that have benefits and contributions to people living in cities. And these are the things that nature offers us in the urban environment, but obviously also in the natural environment, free of charge. And these are the things that will then ultimately, in many respects, form the basis for the sorts of nature-based solutions that are possible in a particular urban context. Now, within ICLEI, we have a huge portfolio of projects globally that deal with nature and nature-based solutions in one of many different ways. And I'm going to literally run through a few of them. But before I do that, I just want to say a few things about the concept of nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches, however one refers to them. And I think the important thing there is to understand that it has two main pillars. The one is about safeguarding society, and the other one is about safeguarding nature. And if we look at the history of this concept, it's important to understand that it had its naissance within the IUCN and the UNFCCC position paper more than 10 years ago. And 2 years ago, the IUCN brought out what they called the nature-based solution standard to provide a guiding framework. And again, there's a definition. It's not universally sort of entrenched, but it is the most standard definition. And I think the important thing is that we have to understand, depending on what the approach, whether the approach is to protect or to support infrastructure or to restore, whatever it may be, that there needs to be a benefit to biodiversity. So it should not be a net biodiversity loss, or we're not looking for things that will lead to monoculture sorts of solutions. And of course, it needs to also contribute to human well-being. And very quickly then, just to give you a snapshot of some of the projects that we are running in ICLEI. Some of these projects are very conventional, very sort of traditional types of nature-based solution projects, but others, such as these, is where we look at ecosystem services and we look at natural assets and see how we can use them either to counter or to shape or to help support land use changes and look at it more from a planning perspective. So these are just two examples. One is from the city of Dar es Salaam and the other one is in Johannesburg. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Dar es Salaam one because it's quite an interesting example. What we have there is one of the fastest growing cities, certainly in Africa, and it's a city that's characterized by very high levels of informality. So much so that the city's formal planning policy frameworks and systems just simply cannot keep up. And yet they have infrastructure needs, and they need to provide and do something with their public open spaces. So what we did there was to have a look at such public open spaces as they are and to see what the natural assets are in and around those areas and to co-develop and co-design an atlas. And we married with this process, we married a spatial approach, an ecosystem services assessment approach, and a stakeholder engagement approach to come up with an atlas of nature's benefits to the city. And this atlas is used as a policy framework to inform investment, be that investment in open space or investment in how to deal with air pollution or heat island effects and the different drivers. You can see there, for example, forest loss, urban sprawl, etc., some of the examples. And here is the more practical application of that policy framework is where we show the map and then we give some practical guidance on how you can use natural vegetation and nature in the urban context to help with something like heat island effects and cooling the city. Then in Europe, there's a range of nature-based solution projects, and these deal with a variety of issues, from something like social cohesion, where there's the Park Flower Power to the People project, which is being implemented in Glasgow, to a more conventional biodiversity project in around urban food forests in Dortmund. Biofilters and the issue of water quality is another project, this time in Finland. Other projects include projects that use nature and green walls to help reduce noise, or for heat reduction. And we also have the water runoff project that is in a school complex in the province of Nantes, France. air quality, climate adaptation, and using nature to support economic growth and jobs and livelihoods. For example, the project of green corridors in Barcelona in Spain. We come back to Africa, my own continent, where we use nature and nature-based solutions to deal with catchment issues, to deal with pollution, sanitation, infrastructure collapse, and the need to build the whole concept of community river stewardship within people living along rivers and streams in the city of Johannesburg. Also to deal with the issue of invasive alien plants, which is a huge part in many parts of my continent. The urban natural assets for Africa is an interesting project because what we do there is we work in cities where there are high levels of informality, and we show how you can use nature-based solutions to deal with issues around river restoration, but also the uses along rivers and how very often these are places where markets or mobility corridors are sort of connected, and it leads to obviously pollution problems. We heard of a similar one from Uganda, and we just show in very practical ways how nature can help resolve some of those problems. The Urban Natural Assets Project has also got a very interesting, innovative and experiential element to it, where we look at how we can use nature in innovative ways to deal with planning challenges or to deal with the integration of built systems and living systems. And out of that has come a range of practical guidance notes and simple ways that are not necessarily very funding or high skill intensive, but are very practical and very effective in helping cities plan and design and build their cities in a more nature positive way. The Local Action for Biodiversity project, which was run in South Africa a few years ago, looked again at the whole issue of wetlands and how you can use wetlands to deal with issues of flood attenuation, job creation, dealing with sanitation problems, etc. And out of that came a whole range of things, such as each of those cities developed a wetland strategy and action plan, which they've taken up into their medium to long-term planning and budgeting processes to ensure that they will continue to invest in their wetland resources, which in South Africa are very, very scarce and very threatened ecosystems. And then just the last few slides, I just want to talk about this platform that we have, Cities with Nature, and we're working on Regions with Nature now. These are online platforms that exist as partnerships. We partner with the Nature Conservancy, with IUCN, with UNEP, WWF, etc., to set up a space, a virtual space where cities can connect, can share, can learn from each other and inspire from each other. And one of the things that we have done through the advocacy work, which I haven't had a chance to talk about today, but is to use these platforms as the place where cities and regions will make their commitments to protecting local nature and biodiversity as a contribution to global biodiversity targets. And that's all I have chance for. I'm sorry that I went through it so quickly, but I am happy to share my presentation and to engage further.
Oh, cool. That was really insightful as well, and a very good ending of our session today. I would have a direct question. When you said that ICLEI has the power, for example, to talk with mayors or municipalities to really reshape urbanization processes like you did in Dar es Salaam, when you then suggest nature-based solutions as a solution for a specific topic, what is the typical reaction? Are mayors or planners aware of NbS, or is it still in its baby shoes more or less?
I think Christian, it depends on where you are. You know, sometimes it is in its baby shoes, but you know what we also find interestingly is often that people call it something else. They might not call it nature-based solutions, but they're doing it. They don't realize necessarily that it's a nature-based solution. The other thing that we're seeing increasingly is there's a greater understanding and a greater need to start working here, because we see, they see that it's a way in which you can often deal with challenges, whether it's, for example, a heat island effect, very effectively, but not necessarily with huge capital infrastructure investment upfront. There's been some interesting research in my own country where they showed that although your initial capital outlay for, let's say, a green infrastructure project might be a little higher than the conventional gray infrastructure project, the long-term maintenance is much, much lower, because obviously you're not having to keep, maintaining a hard infrastructure. Nature looks after itself if you look after it. And this is an important factor in that it's often in your indigent communities and your vulnerable communities where they cannot afford high rates and paying taxes and things that you need to also provide these services. So there's a growing awareness of how valuable these sorts of solutions are. And one of the things that we've seen, for example, that Dar es Salaam example is that they've already started using this project or this product, the thematic atlas, to inform investment around how much money and where they're going to invest in what they do with their public open spaces. And it's also resulted in the city of Johannesburg, for example, coming to us and saying, we want to have a similar product. And it's a particularly useful methodology that we developed there. It took very little time, very little money, and we were able to do it in a situation where there's not a lot of data that is easily and readily accessible to the city because of the methodology that we use there.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite the other panelists as well to turn on your cameras, and we would like to do the closing round now. The topic today was on effective implementation of nature-based solutions. And we heard 4 rather small-scale case studies, and now the ideas of eClay. What I found out, or what I clearly heard out, is that if you want to make a nature-based solution really sufficient or sustainable, a lot of pieces have to fit together first. So be it financing, the policymaker, the capacity training, the social aspects of the local communities. According to your experience, and this is the final question to all of you, according to your experience, what part of planning is often underestimated and then turns out to be a real slow downer for projects? So what is often overlooked? I'm asking this because we are working a lot with NGOs, for example, who try to implement nature-based solutions. And I have 1 or 2 ideas what is often overlooked, but I would be very interested in your ideas as well. So what part of planning is really essential, but underestimated, and then turns out to be a slow downer for projects? And I would like to start with Sid, because you were nodding quite heavily.
I think I was nodding because Rizka had asked a question that basically leads exactly to what you were asking in the chat, in the Q&A earlier. I think one of the most overlooked issues is that nature-based solutions operate at the landscape scale. They don't operate like our seawalls or a bulkhead where you put that in front of your property, and if it fails, you maintain it and you keep going in that cycle. If you put in a nature-based solution, you need to be making sure that that entire landscape is supporting it and keeping it. Just like what Ingrid just said, if they're healthy, they work. But if we're going and polluting the water, then it's going to have effects here. If you're going to reduce, if you're having logging upstream, there's too much sediment. If you dam upstream, there's too little sediment. So there's really that interconnection that we need to take care of.
Okay, cool, thank you. Then next, I would like to hand over to Lillian.
So in my opinion, it's the livelihoods of the people, at least from my context, because I realize that a country like Uganda that has a backbone in agriculture and also depends heavily on natural resources, nature-based solutions have to be in consultation with the people whose livelihoods are likely to be compromised, besides other things at least. Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, there are a lot of nature-based solutions which could provide also livelihoods then. So one has to more or less do maybe a bit more capacity training. But thank you very much. Then next one, Asmita. You're still muted? Asmita, you're still muted?
Yeah. Can you hear me? So it's not only just drawing from Canada, but also the Indian experience that I think one one category of governance system does not recognize the importance of another governance system. So like, say a federal government is not that much recognizant of a provincial government versus a local government. So it's like some sort of a, like, I don't know, hierarchy or power problem. And this is a problem that is seen in many countries. So I think that is something that nature-based solutions implementation is facing, would face. And this is also a problem, like say a nature-based solution is emerging in a Canadian municipality. It will not, for it to get recognized, a second layer of governance system is not, that coordination is not happening, that hierarchy is there. So how do those partnerships form? And I think this is a similar problem I've seen as a planner operating in India as well, where like in a state like Maharashtra, if like a certain governance solution or a nature-based solution is emerging, the state of Delhi is not really very much recognizing. And that creates a lot of like actual problems, like informal settlements in a country like India. And I think there are a certain sector of informality in developed countries as well. So I think that would be my.
Okay, thank you very much. A third perspective here. So Sushita, maybe you next.
Yeah, in my view, according to my experience, what we don't focus is the financial sustainability, because when the NGOs or other facilitator is present in that scene, then maybe the local stakeholders also get inspired and provide some year annual expenses, but later on they might get back to their own priorities, and priorities which is maybe more engineering solutions. So to set the financial mechanism is very, very important for the sustainability of the NbS. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And now with the last concluding remarks to Ingrid again, what is your opinion on that?
I think that all of these points that have been made are very valid, and we experience that too. But one of the things that we found is that often what one underestimates, or in the planning process you don't give enough time to, is the fact that you need to bring everybody on board. For this you need to raise the awareness sometimes. You need to get buy-in, political buy-in from beneficiaries. You need to get buy-in. You need to understand that there may be multiple entry points. And when one sits in a planning situation, very often it has a very sort of myopic, you focus on one particular thing. Yet if you're working in a community, working with people, there are often multiple entry points that one can use. And I think that people often forget about. So one of the things that we found that really works is to use a process of co-production, co-design. And that in a way is bringing all these multiple things together and helps to really embed the process and get a proper uptake for it amongst all of your stakeholders.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, this participatory approach, as we heard about that in the first two case studies. Thank you very much. I would like to take on the words from Sushita about financing, because from our experience in the Munich Re Foundation world, more or less, it's also mainly about the sustainable financing. Because when you support, for example, a local NGO with a pilot project, the typical financing period is roughly, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, if you talk with GIZ. But the time frame until an ecosystem or a nature-based solution really works out might be way longer. And here there's a clear gap. So we might need to think about further financing mechanisms. And here I think we are still in the beginning in many cases. One interesting example for a financing option could be, for example, an insurance scheme. And exactly about that, we will hear tomorrow about a coral reef protection insurance scheme in Mexico in our closing session. And I will end now this seminar with a short advertisement. So tomorrow we will have our session A9. Again, around 1 a.m. in Central European summertime. And I invite you to join here as well. We will have a speaker from the Nature Conservancy speaking about the insurance cover. But again, we will also hear from Coco Warner from the UNFCCC and our co-host from United Nations University. Having said that, I would really like to thank our panelists today. This was really, really insightful. I learned a lot. And also, Ingrid, thank you for stepping in for Puria. This was really great that you could make the time. and hope to see you all tomorrow. And I wish you a nice afternoon, morning, night, evening, wherever you are. Take care and have a great day. Bye.